This is the Jocko Unraveling podcast, episode number 38, with Darryl Cooper and me, Jocko Willink. And yes, it's been a while since we've done one of these. But the name of the podcast is the Unraveling Podcast, and it certainly seems at this time that things are unraveling very quickly. It is October 11th, 2023. And, well, things are falling apart very quickly over in the Middle East, in Israel, in Gaza. Quote from Blood Meridian. "Makes no difference what men think of war," said the judge. "War endures. War always was here. Before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner. That is the way it was and will be. That way and not some other way." And sometimes I got to just refer to that book to remind me that human beings are savages and we will just kill each other.
As well ask man what he thinks of stone.
Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes, you get, for me, I'm an optimistic person, I guess I might say. And I'll look at the world and things seem to be moving in the right directions and things seem to be going well. And then you see what's happened in the past week or so just reminds me that, yeah, you can be heading in the right direction and get completely and utterly derailed by the mayhem that's going on. And, I always talk about war being a test of wills, and it definitely is a test of wills. And the only reason war happens is because we don't know whose will is stronger. Because if we knew whose will was stronger, we wouldn't fight. If I knew that you had a stronger will in your country than I had in mine, I'd go, you know what? We better just figure out a deal here, and vice versa. But when you think your will is stronger than mine, and I think my will is stronger than yours, there's only one way to find out. It's the same thing in a bar fight, right? It's like no one picks a fight that they know they're going to lose, or very few people do. Sometimes they still do because you get emotional and you get wild. I mean, you could say that about Hamas right now. Do they think they're going to win territory back?
No, their victory conditions are very different.
Yeah, they know that them getting people killed is good. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't go in and execute the operation that they executed with clearly. I was listening to somebody debrief on the operation that they conducted, and they talked about the coordination, this mass coordination, how it's had to have been coordinated at such a high level that has to be Iranian influence. And look, there's Iranian influence, but when you have decentralized command and you just give the commander's intent that at this time, go in, and your mission is to murder, rape, kill, kidnap, and you just unleash everyone at a given time, that's actually a squared away method for creating a lot of chaos in a very short period of time, rather than trying to coordinate like the U.S. military would coordinate combined arms, and they'd have phase lines because they don't care about collateral damage, number one. They don't care about blue on blue at all. So they don't care about any of the things that that constrain like a Western force like America. There's all these constraints that we have on us. Rules of engagement, collateral damage, blue on blue, those types of things. So we set up these very controlling timelines and phase lines. They didn't have to do any of that. They say, hey, look, at this time, go. Rape, kill, murder, kidnap. Capture people if you can. And so you tell a bunch of fanatics to do that? Yep. Guess what? Was there some limited coordination between, hey, we're going to take the motorcycles, you guys cut the wire, we'll put the explosives on? Yeah, there was some groups that were clearly working together. Some of those air assaults on the whatever paragliders, sure, there's some coordination there. We're all going to take off at the same time. We're all going to fly to this general region. But it's chaotic in nature, but it takes a lot less coordination because they don't care about anything. They don't have any rules. They don't have any constraints.
It definitely demonstrated a level, a capability that Hamas has never shown before. The paraglider thing, interestingly, They had those available in 2014 during that war. They didn't put them to use. But I just read this morning, actually, that they were using those things a couple times from Lebanon back in the 70s. So that's an old tactic, I guess. But I do think that, like I used to go to Israel a lot for work. I would work with IDF personnel and contractors over there on air defense matters. And over drinks, I talk to these guys, and I would always want to just learn from them their opinions on things in the region, stuff. I would do that wherever I went. And what I found consistently, I guess I started going over there in 2009. I probably went there at least a dozen, maybe 15 or 20 times from 2009 to about 2019. And so this is 3 years after when I started going over there, 3 years after the 2006 war against Hezbollah. And, the Israelis, they had a tough time on the ground. They ended up pulling back and just sort of leveling southern Lebanon. And it was a real wake-up call that, the Arab states, Iran, that these were not the only military threats that they had to worry about. They had this group Hezbollah up here that had to be taken seriously. And so by the time I got up there and started talking to them, they would talk about the Iranian nuclear program and things like that sometimes, but it was like a distant threat, sort of. The thing they were concerned with on a day-to-day basis was Hezbollah. Like, they had a lot of respect for Hezbollah's capabilities on the ground, their willingness to die in place and actually coordinate their movements, and they were getting better and better equipped. And everybody I talked to looked down the road, and they just assumed it was 100% guaranteed, as far as they were concerned, there was going to be another war with Hezbollah, and then the next one was going to be decisive, one way or the other. And everybody expected it, and that's what they were planning for. Now, on the other hand, what I found was that Hamas was very much underestimated in a lot of ways. I shouldn't say underestimated in the first half. So the first 5 years, like 2009 to 2014 that I went there, 2009 they had that brief conflict, the flare-up there. And Hamas did what they always do. They were terrible. They showed no ability to coordinate, no ability to layer their attacks. Just they would scatter and flee whenever any serious IDF forces came within range, and just had no cohesion whatsoever, no unit support. And they were looked at as, I wouldn't say quite like a police problem, but like a problem, not a strategic problem. Mm-hmm. They were looked at as people who, like, they could come over and pick out some soft targets and do some real horrific damage, like, to people and to property, but that is not going to damage Israel's position strategically or anything like that. And 2014 came, and something happened that we're not seeing right now from Israel, which I'm gratified about. 3 Israeli teenagers were kidnapped and murdered by some guys who were affiliated with Hamas. And the Israelis just sort of flew off the handle and sent a bunch of ground forces into Gaza, and Hamas was waiting for them. And they had learned a lot from Hezbollah's solid performance against the IDF in 2006. They grabbed the IDF by the belt, got real close, and sort of shut down their air and artillery advantages, and took 10-1 casualties still, but they did inflict casualties. They destroyed a lot of armored vehicles, tanks, a couple tanks, and inflicted Israeli personnel casualties. And it got to the point where the Israeli, they had huge network tunnel system, tunnels that could not be easily destroyed without Israeli engineers actually going and setting explosives. They were very well reinforced concrete, bunkers and tunnel systems, booby-trapped IED networks just all over the place. And they were also demonstrating combat capabilities that Hamas had never demonstrated before. They were effectively using snipers. They had 25 to 3,500 man brigades, 6 of them distributed along the front, each responsible for a different sector that were working together, it seems, to a certain extent. Each one of them had its own layout of capabilities. It had infantry, anti-tank forces, mortar forces, and they were able to coordinate and work together and provide supporting fire with rockets and mortar. This is just something that Hamas had never shown before. And it showed that they are a military problem now that Israel had to take seriously. But even after that war, the people that I talked to, And you see the same kind of thing, analysts in the media and stuff would sort of look at it the same way, that, yeah, if we ever go push in to Gaza again, like, we've got to be prepared for them to put up a resistance that we have to take seriously. But nobody took seriously the possibility that Hamas had a strong offensive capability, that they could do something like this. I mean, I remember the morning, a few hours into the attack, there were reports already that there was fighting going on in 22 different locations, that they had come bulldozed the fence and cut wires and then rushed through in vans and trucks and motorcycles. They had those paragliders. They had people coming up the coast. And they all hit their attack spaces within a window of a couple hours.
That's impressive, yep.
And that's just not something that Israel had ever anticipated from them, and I suppose that's not a mistake they're going to make again. And so they're not rushing in with their ground forces right now. They are preparing, it looks like, a large ground invasion. What the goal of that is going to be and what Israel's victory conditions here are very hard to kind of foresee. But, they haven't rushed in on the ground yet. And so it tells me that they have learned at least that lesson from 2014. And it's going to be, there's going to be some fighting, though, especially if, Hamas bragged a lot in 2014 that they had a lot of man pads and anti-air machine gun, like heavy machine guns and stuff, and they never used them, or if they did, they didn't use them effectively and down any Israeli aircraft in 2014. But if they do have even a capability that Israel has to account for that might constrain their air operations so that they do have to go in this incredibly densely packed place. I mean, it's, like the most crowded areas of Hong Kong, like level of population density, and fight amidst ruined buildings with booby traps and IEDs everywhere and civilians everywhere. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, I've been looking at some of the pictures of the way Gaza looks. Even right now, it's a nightmare. It's all bombed out. And you and I were talking before we pressed record. When you bomb a building and you think to yourself, well, okay, that's no longer a threat. That's not true. And it's still a threat, especially when you have all these tunnel systems, because all the air power in the world against a fortified underground bunker, like, they're still there. And it doesn't take much common sense to go, oh, we're about to get bombed. You go in the shelter, you wait there for a few hours, and when the booming stops, you come back out and you get ready to fight. And they set up all kinds of, when you drop these buildings, these rubbled out buildings actually form really good fighting positions. So it's going to be really hard. And when you go in there, like you're talking about air support, again, yeah, if they have man pads, how many helicopters are going to sacrifice? Some of the images that are coming through right now of Israeli helicopters getting shot down, are any of those confirmed? Are those real?
I only saw 2, and they were both bullshit video game footage.
So
we're in the era of Ghost of Kiev, so it's really hard.
Yeah, it's hard to know. But if they start losing some helicopters, the fast movers overhead, that becomes a tough job when you're trying to drop bombs in close quarters with civilians and friendlies that are moving through the area. So really, I think this boils down to more ground fighting with tanks and with infantry on the ground, which is, hey, if you do absolutely everything right, you're still taking significant casualties. And
even if Hamas was not purposely using those people as human shields, the environment would guarantee massive civilian casualties.
There's going to be massive civilian casualties. There's going to be massive Israeli casualties. I mean, it's just going to be a bloodbath. It's going to be a bloodbath on both sides. And the perception from the world is, of course, the dying civilians is going to create a lot of animosity against Israel, and people may or may not remember what triggered that.
I see people saying, "Oh, this time's different." Like, people are going to remember because of the scale of this atrocity, and I don't think so. Like, that's just not how it's ever worked in the past for Israel. You look at 2014; these 3 boys were kidnapped, tortured, mutilated, and murdered. They're children. And at first, it was vigils, for these 3 boys. Even up in the West Bank, the Palestinians, civilians, they were holding vigils up there even. And around the world, the consensus was that Israel has to do something. They can't just let something like this pass. But it only took a few weeks. After their ground assault got stalled, they pulled back and just sort of, they just bombarded the hell out of the whole area and really destroyed like large sections of Gaza. I mean, I think the estimates are that about 2,500 people were killed and about 10,000 were wounded in Gaza, and 60 to 70% of those are civilians. Not exactly easy to say what that means, If there's a 16-year-old boy that does chores for Hamas and maybe even sometimes totes a rifle, but he's not he doesn't have a card in his wallet, is he a civilian? So that's kind of hard, but that's kind of what happened in 2006 in Lebanon, too, is they got stalled by Hezbollah on the ground. They pulled back and just bombarded the hell out of southern Lebanon. Both of those cases, it took a week or two before world opinion, especially in Europe, which, it's a little bit stronger for Israel over here because of, various reasons, the evangelical Christian community and just our relationship to them. But up in Europe, where they have a sort of history of more left-wing anti-colonial fervor, or more of an anti-colonial focus among their left wing than we do over here. And now today, obviously, there's the issue of all these European countries, Western European countries, have large Muslim populations that you would like to say, are out there condemning Hamas for massacring civilians and kidnapping women and children. And some of them are, absolutely, but not all of them and not enough of them. And that's something that you hate to say it, but these are democratic countries where people have to get elected by voters. And that population in Europe is going to affect European politics and how they address situations like this. So I have kind of a question to get back to the combat situation where, I was thinking as I was driving over here, about how, you look at in 2004 when we went into Fallujah and the Marines were just sort of, it's followed an atrocity, against those Blackwater guys and videos of them being paraded around and stuff. And so we reacted, and Bush sent the Marines in there and told them to go take care of the situation. And when you tell Marines to do that, they're going to do it. And Fallujah was destroyed. I mean, that city got wrecked. A little later on.
Just to point out, they gave the civilian populace ample time to get out of Fallujah. That was
right.
That was probably about as good as you could do it.
Yeah.
About as clean as you could do it. They gave this, and the Mujahideen didn't really keep them there. So there was a mass exodus leaving Fallujah before the Marines went in and took it.
So then 2006, we want to go into Ramadi. The Iraqi government doesn't want another Fallujah, and so you guys go in and take a totally different tack. And the question I was thinking about is, in Ramadi, you had some Iraqi, but a lot of international jihadists and others who had come in and they were extorting and blackmailing and threatening and raping and killing the people of Ramadi, who, if you could convince, not that I'm sure they had their supporters or their, collaborators, but you could go in there with the hope and expectation that if you could demonstrate to the population that you could protect them from these people, that there would be people willing to help you because they were suffering under this occupation, essentially, of these jihadists.
Yep.
How is something like that even possible in a place where the civilian population, it's not like every single person is a member of Hamas, but if it comes between the Israelis and Hamas, then they are supporters of Hamas. They're not, there's no turn, Israel's always been able to turn one guy here who wanted some money and infiltrate over there. But in terms of a campaign of winning the population over, that's not going to happen.
Does not seem possible at all.
Yeah.
And also in Ramadi, you had the people that were kind of bringing the population on board eventually was the tribal sheikhs that lived there that didn't want Al-Qaeda there. So you had actually a totally different scenario.
Yeah. So I've
had a couple people hit me up are they going to do this like Ramadi? And I said, no, they're not going to do this like Ramadi. This is going to be not like Ramadi, and it's not going to be like Fallujah either, because there's going to be civilians in there, and they're like you already pointed out, a lot of civilians are going to die, and that's what's about to happen. Could they do some kind of siege warfare where they've shut off the water, they've shut off the power, they've shut off the they prevent food from getting in there, and they start to say, look, we'll give food to civilians that come out and want to surrender and want to leave the area. Come on out. Would Hamas allow them to do that?
No,
I don't think so.
Yeah, and that also runs into the problem that if past engagements are a guide, that time is not on the side of the Israelis. Like the clock is ticking right now, where they have room to get something done before a critical mass of world opinion says enough is enough, because it's just how, we don't live there. These aren't our brothers and sisters who are getting massacred, in some kibbutz in southern Israel. And so people just see mass death and destruction in Gaza, and it's not like it turns them into Hamas supporters, but it makes the global community say, okay, enough is enough. Like, stop. Let's, broker a ceasefire or something. And once that, to a certain extent, after something like this, Israel's going to be like we were after 9/11. Like, yeah, piss off if you don't like it. Like, we're going to go deal with this, and we're tired of listening to you people. But, Israel is a state with long-term interests, and they can't just totally do that,
I mean, after 9/11, that mentality was strong, and it lasted a pretty good amount of time. I mean, this wasn't even a matter of days, and there was supporting Palestinian support protests all over the world. So this timeline that the Israelis have I think it's already actually gone. So now what they're working on is how do we move forward, period. And I don't think they at this point care. I don't think if you what's the percentage of population of Americans that were killed on September 11th? We have 330 million people here. We lost 3,000. There's 10 million people in Israel.
That's one of the things my Israeli friends always bring up is they say, this is a really small country. Mm-hmm. Pretty much everybody you talk to over there at least knows somebody who knows somebody who's been affected by one of these attacks. Like, they don't necessarily in their immediate family, or maybe they're not their extended family, but someone in their extended family knows somebody who was affected. And that's not something that we're really used to over here. These are little pinpricks on a giant map over here. San Bernardino happens, or the Pulse nightclub map. Very small, drops in the ocean. Not so over there.
No. So I think that they don't care right now. And if you try and see the perspective from the Israeli side, imagine that your sister or your mother or your daughter was, you got to see the social media of her being dragged away by her hair after being raped and loaded into the back of a truck while people are yelling Allah Akbar.
And then executed on camera later.
And then executed on camera later. There's no stopping. Yeah. There's no stopping. There's no stopping. So I believe that this is going to be very, very destructive for Hamas, which brings the question about, and I sort of already alluded to it, what is Hamas? What were they thinking of trying to get out of this? Now, what is it? Saul Alinsky says that the result or the reaction of the people that you attack is the actual, that's what you want. That's what the true benefit of like a guerrilla attack is. It's not that you blew up a water supply or you killed 3 civilians. It's what they do back to you. That's the reward. That's what you wanted. So is that what we're looking at here? Hamas is in a win-win situation because almost no matter what Israel does, they're screwed. Because if Israel sat back and said, oh, you know what, we're logical people and we want to continue to move forward towards peace, well, then they're just going to get more attacks and things are going to get worse. If they go hard in the paint and start total destruction, they're going to get the world popular support eventually turning against them. And it seems like it's almost a win-win situation for Hamas.
I think pending some unforeseen by me outcome, I think Hamas probably already feels like they have won. Whatever happens after this. a lot of them are going to get killed. A huge number of them are going to get killed. But these are people who, in the past, have demonstrated a willingness to put on a suicide vest and step onto a school bus. So they're not making the same calculations as you and me when it comes to them dying, right?
Would you say, real quick, so you bring up that calculation right there, and would you say that when the Hamas members go out and shoot and kill a bunch of women and children and rape and murder them, that their calculation is off because that's something that happens more readily in their culture? You know, women get raped a lot in that culture. There's honor killing of women. There's abuse of women. I mean, I've seen it plenty of times. Those, women in those countries, oftentimes they are, they're basically slaves, sex slaves. It's a terrible situation. So
they're miscalculating like the real effect that has on our mentality. Yeah, maybe. On the other hand, I named this episode The Administration of Savagery after a jihadist document that was published back in 2004. You probably were getting briefed on and familiar with it at the time. So one of the things it talks about, Osama bin Laden talked about this, jihadists everywhere have talked about this, just like Saul Alinsky, that provoking an overwhelming response is actually the goal. And that's why so many of these attacks, because you got to think about it. Like, Hamas has to know, even if they don't quite know how strongly we're going to react against violence toward women, say, or something, they still know that, if they were to go attack Israeli military bases, which they did and did some damage, or even go take a bunch of hostages or something, as opposed to going into a kibbutz and beheading children and raping women and videotaping this, that's designed to elicit shock and outrage and to create the kind of mechanical response that really, especially in a democratic country like Israel, it really is kind of a mechanical response. What happens next? Because you can't, even if Netanyahu was just suddenly Gandhi and he was like, you know what, we're not going to fall for this trap. We see what they're trying. He would get thrown out of office and replaced by somebody who was going to go punish these people, because the legitimacy of any state, and especially a state like Israel that has dealt with what it's dealt with over the years, and to a certain degree this goes for Hamas and the Palestinian Authority and stuff, so any state, that you need to be able to demonstrate a capability to protect your citizens. You can't always protect them, though, and you have to demonstrate a capability to retaliate when that does, slip through your net. And Israel's always embraced that philosophy, because you can't, no level of police state in Israel would have over the years prevented a lot of these attacks from happening. There's just no way, unless you assigned an officer to every Arab in the country and had them walk around with them or something. There's just no way to do it that's really practical. And so they had to engage in deterrence and and their responses had to be somewhat unpredictable, where the jihadists might have thought this is what they were going to get, but it turned out that it was a lot worse than that. And that has happened in the past, where they did miscalculate in that sense. Something has changed in Israeli tactics over the years. It really started to change in the late 70s when the PLO terrorist tactics started to change toward, the PLO started doing the types of attacks that we're looking at right now. These just ISIS-style, go into a village at night and just massacre as many families as you can before the security forces get to you, and then you die, and that's, yay, we won. That's something that really started happening consistently in the mid to late 70s. And the Israelis, prior to that, had always focused on targeted assassinations, treating this as a police and intelligence problem, trying to deal with these things. And in the late 70s, they started to transition over to more dealing with this as a military problem. And they started using their special forces, but then their regular forces to retaliate when these things happen. And when, the immediate effect of that was the war in Lebanon, which was not good for anybody. It wasn't good for Israel. It wasn't good for anybody involved. And for a while, they got away from that. But Netanyahu's really kind of embraced that way of doing things. Now, the thing is, I don't know if there is any other way to deal with Hamas, though. Like, in addition to the fact that they demonstrated a capability to coordinate forces that they had never demonstrated before, I am blown away, and heads are going to roll, I have to imagine, in the Israeli intelligence establishment for how this got by them. I mean, the level of plan, this had to have, this took months. This took months. The first several hours, they launched like 2,500 to 5,000, depending on who you listen to, of their Qassam rockets. These things are 7-8 feet long, 5 or 6 inches in diameter. They're not huge, but 2,500 of them's freaking huge.
Is there any indicators so far as to what happened with the intel? Because, you could go down the whole list of, again, I pointed out in the beginning.
Thousands of people involved.
Yeah, I pointed out in the beginning that, this didn't take like some excessive amount of coordination compared to an American operation. But don't get me wrong. When you have, like you said, 2,500 to 5,000 rockets, when you have these little aircraft being used, when you have the boats being used to bring in, when you have tunnels being used, when you have breaching of legitimate security fences, like all those things, they absolutely took some level of coordination. And how many troops were involved? Thousands of troops involved. To give you an example, when we were in Iraq and we would be doing an operation with the Iraqi soldiers, we wouldn't tell them what we were doing until, a half an hour prior to. And we're talking about 30 guys.
Yeah.
And so why? Because guys have been burned by that before. So now you're talking about 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people over the course of, I bet they could get this thing coordinated under a month. That's my assessment. Again, I'm thinking really decentralized command.
Assuming they had the equipment in place. And
that would be the logistics would be harder than anything else. But also, they don't have like a huge logistics train. Who knows? I would have to get a better look at their logistics picture. But all that being said, let's say it was a month. A month of 5,000 people keeping a secret? That's not feasible. It's actually not feasible.
On the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, where you had to imagine that Israeli intelligence was on alert.
Yeah.
Supposedly the Egyptians tried to warn them, and it's tough, obviously, just like with 9/11. Like you get indications every single day, hey, an attack's coming or whatever, and you have to sift out what to take seriously and how seriously to take it. But it's amazing because, this is not, Israel Mossad has the reputation that it has for a reason. You read like books on the history of the Mossad and Israeli intelligence operations and their ability to infiltrate, turn people, stay on top, not to mention their signals intelligence, which is top notch, and Gaza is completely saturated with it. They're good. They have a reputation for a reason, and it's really amazing that this somehow got by them. And I got to imagine heads are going to roll. They've got an Israeli general held captive down there in Gaza right now. There's a video of him being like hauled off in his pajamas. It looked like they pulled him out of bed or something. This is not the kind of thing that. So here's a question, right? Is given everything that's already happened, what would Israel have to accomplish in order to feel like they could say, okay, that was a sufficient response to what happened and we can go home or call this off or dial it back? Because eradicating Hamas, that sounds nice in theory, but like I said, in 2014, just their fighters that they had deployed, their actual gun-toting fighters in that war, they supposedly had 12 to 15,000 spread out along the front. And, when you count people who weren't holding guns, the people who were just supporters, the people who are 14 years old, so they're not quite there yet, but like they're going to be in a couple years, like to root all those people out and just eradicate Hamas, it just seems like it would take a level of devastation that would be really hard to sustain over the length of time that it would take,
Yeah, that's they've got to be asking themselves that question. And Netanyahu said kind of out of the gate, correct me if I'm wrong, like, we will make sure this can never happen again, and Hamas will be destroyed. He said Hamas will be, or they've said Hamas will be destroyed, right?
They did say that, yeah.
So Are they ready to just, like, I think there's going to be some siege warfare activities in Gaza, like just siege warfare. No one gets in, no one gets out, and over time, just wear them down and see if it's interesting. You talk about what the amount of support that the normal Palestinian, that like who's the most peace-loving Palestinian that's living in Gaza, how many of them are there? And one thing that sucks about the way the world works is that people that want peace, for obvious reasons, they're not fighters, right? Yeah. So when you've got the majority of the like the gangsters win. The gangsters run things. There's a reason why gangsters run things. You go to a prison, who runs the prison? It's not the person who's nicest. It's the person that will do the most destruction and damage. In a mob, well, what's the deal with a mob? Who ends up running a mob? The people that were willing to kill to get to the top and step on other people. If you go to a place like this, you go inside Gaza, well, how did they win the election? How did Hamas win the election? Was it because they put together the most positive platform? Sure, certainly there's a lot of people that believed in what they were doing, but there's a lot of people that are like, hey, look, I'm not, okay, that's what we're dealing with. I don't want to get smashed. I want to live my life, so I'm just kind of on board. So whether or not you could put siege on Gaza for a long enough time period that the people that don't support Hamas actually turn against them, I don't even know if that's a thing. It might not even be a thing. And so therefore, that idea of siege, what that turns into is just like total destruction.
There's also that dark dynamic that, you've just seen over and over again where, maybe on both sides of a conflict, just 5% of each side are really hardcore. They want to go over there and massacre women and children. They want to do whatever it takes to just harm the other side because of what they've done to us, et cetera. Like, that 5% has a way of being able to drag everybody else down to their level over time. I mean, if you look just exactly what you were just saying, actually, go back to the 1990s when the Oslo Accords were being negotiated. You had Arafat and Rabin shaking hands, and look, I mean, they were on the cusp of having an actual deal. I mean, Yasser Arafat, and people today, Arafat's kind of old news, but this guy for decades was like the arch terrorist in the world, basically. Hundreds of Israelis killed, like just disaster, like of a human being. And here he was, negotiating a settlement. And may or may not have lasted or whatever, but the Israelis were making some concessions, not enough for Hamas, though. And so what did Hamas do? Hamas wanted to derail the whole process after years of work had been put into this process. I mean, Rabin was a hardcore Israeli military guy. That's why he was able to make peace, like Nixon going to China kind of thing. And so huge amount of work from the United States, from the Palestinian Authority, from Israel in negotiating this and keeping the process going over the course of years. And Hamas says, well, we don't like where this is going because it's going to, if we agree to this, then that's essentially saying that everything else they've stolen from us, that's, ratified. And so they got a couple suicide bombers and went and blew up a couple city buses in Israel, and it was all over. That was it. And then on the Israeli side, there was an extremist religious Zionist who assassinated the prime minister, Yitzhak Rabin, for trying to make peace and give away parts of, what they considered their heritage lands. And so these are like, how many Israelis are the type of people who would want to assassinate the prime minister for making a deal with, the Palestinians, or who would even cheer for it if it happened, or who would even equivocate about? Very, very few. How many Palestinians are willing to strap on a suicide bomb and step onto a bus? Probably not a majority, and yet those people can dictate terms to everybody else because, you could be a pretty moderate person and then you see videos of people that, your second cousin knew from college getting raped and murdered, while people cheer all around them, and you're not so moderate anymore, And the thing about this conflict is that kind of thing's been going on for 70 years now, 75 years now. And everybody has so many reasons to be pissed off. A lot of them are good reasons, that everybody feels perfectly righteous in their hatred. And I'll tell you, man, like I do not envy the position, the predicament that Israeli planners are in right now, because this is a situation that I don't really think. There's a longtime mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kolik, and he's like the most quotable guy ever. He's always got a good quote for every situation. And a reporter asked him one time what he thought about the Palestinian problem. And he said, kind of a famous quote, he said, Palestinian problem, we don't have a problem. Problems have solutions. What we have is a condition, and you manage conditions. And it's, you manage conditions until they flare up and become acute problems and acute conditions. And that's kind of where it looks like it is right now.
Yeah, I definitely had some thoughts preparing for this where I just started thinking about oil and water. Like, there's nothing you can do. You can put them in the same glass and shake them up, and they'll be together for a little while, and then they're going to separate. And that's the way this is going to work. And so, yeah, I agree with that assessment. And this is going to get, like you said, the planners. What are the Israeli planners? How much destruction are they okay with? At what point do they care about what the world does? Do they care about what the world thinks? Do they care if they destroy Gaza and how many more decades of hate and frustration does that bring them in the future? Does it matter? Because they're already hated and frustrated anyways. So
yeah, that's the question though, right? I mean, like, how many of these people would they have to kill to actually improve the situation? Because I don't know if there's a number other than all of them. You know what I mean? Like, so let's say they go in there and 2014 war was devastating. I mean, there were just whole sections of the city that were destroyed. It was chaos. It was they destroyed a lot of Gaza. 2,500 people died, 10,000 or so were wounded. Let's say they go in here and 100,000 people they kill, 300,000 wounded. Just a massive, unprecedented assault in the context of this conflict.
What's that, like a tenth of the population? What is it?
Is a 20th of the population.
20th of the population.
And
which is insane to think about.
It is insane to think about. And
it would also not be that is not unimaginable.
Right.
It is not unimaginable at all.
Because they're so packed in like sardines and everything else. And so, but even then, okay, so they do that kind of damage, unprecedented, really unthinkable damage in the context of this conflict. Would that accomplish anything? Like, I don't know if it would actually accomplish anything. Mm-hmm. And I don't really have a good answer to what Israel should do. I mean, I know what I told people, like, I am sometimes nuanced to a fault on this issue because I know the history well enough to have sympathy for both sides' causes, whether or not I have sympathy for the people involved, like Hamas. I understand the legitimate grievances and concerns that both sides have, and sometimes that, like when something like this happens, like you don't want to lose that completely because then you get caught up in emotion, and that's what's happening to a lot of people right now. I'm seeing like normally pretty reasonable people like using, genocidal language on Twitter. But on the other hand, like I do want to address like one of the things that it's something that pro-Palestine people will bring up, and I've been talking to people over the last few days about this. Is what they'll point out is like, okay, look, they'll ask the question from the standpoint of the Palestinians: what are we supposed to do? You tell us what we're supposed to do, because if we do nothing, which there have been periods of years where we didn't do much at all. Settlements keep expanding in the West Bank. Our villages and everything are getting broken up and displaced, and that whole area is just gradually becoming a part of Greater Israel effectively, and that's where things are headed. Gaza, nothing's improved in Gaza. The place is still under siege. Israel still controls what goes in and out of it, whether we can have construction materials, et cetera, et cetera. And so for many years, people said, what the Palestinians should do is look back to the Green March in Spanish Morocco back in the 75, I think it was, where Spain still owned this part of the Sahara that, it now belongs to Morocco. Morocco wanted it back, and Spain wasn't just going to give it back. But the Moroccans realized that, you know what, I don't think these people really have the will to just kill a bunch of our civilians and so here's what we're going to do. And they called the Green March. They all just walked in, and they walked right past the border guards, because it turned out, they weren't going to just gun down a bunch of civilians just to hold on to this place. And it worked. And so people have said that's what the Palestinians should do. Obviously, all the people in Gaza, they should just walk up to the fence and say, hey, just approach it like that. And in 2018, they kind of tried that. It wasn't 100%, peaceful. There were some people like flying some kites over the fence, trying to start fires that, were on fire and stuff. But by the standards CNN used in America in 2020 during the Floyd riots, it was mostly peaceful. And the Israeli soldiers who were on the fence were given orders to shoot anybody who came within 300 yards of the fence. And that eventually, after a little while, that got lowered to 100 yards. And there are videos of them shooting people. There's a video of some snipers shooting someone in a wheelchair. They shot kids. They shot women. And the Palestinians will say, okay, this is what you guys have been telling us to do all this time. Mm-hmm. Well, we did it. And snipers shot like 1,000 of us. Not a single Israeli casualty, killed or wounded. There was no damage on the Israeli side. And over 1,000 people on our side got shot by snipers. So not any kind of indiscriminate bombing or anything. Like, this is essentially executions, And so this is what happened. We tried the Green March tactic. This is what happened. So now you tell us what we're supposed to do. And my answer to those people is, it doesn't, at this point, like when you do something like Hamas has done over the last several days now, when you're recording yourselves raping and beheading women and killing children, then you're rolling the iron dice. I mean, it's all over. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, all of those historical grievances, the broader context, that's all interesting once this conflict settles down and people come sit down at a table and maybe try to negotiate something. Then all that's relevant. Right now, none of that is relevant. I mean, this is a situation where Hamas has provoked a reaction that cannot be stopped at this point. And it is sad for the people who are there, who are going to be affected, who maybe don't like Hamas and don't want this conflict and want it all to end. But I do kind of resent a lot of the people out there who are trying to make it seem like it's just, 100% of the Palestinians are just laughing and cheering at dead Israeli kids, and therefore we can kind of just do whatever we want to the whole population. I really resent that way of thinking. It's very dangerous. But it's also kind of inevitable after you see things like you've seen over the last several days.
Yeah. What happened in Morocco and Spain leaving, and it's the same thing with Algeria, right? The French were like, you know what, we're not sticking this thing out. They didn't have the will, right? It's a test of wills. The big difference here being that this is where the Israelis live. Yeah. Like the Spanish don't need to stay in Morocco, and the French didn't need to stay in Algeria. The other thing that's been interesting, and I saw a little bit right as this happened, right in the beginning, I saw it seemed like media, some people, I think probably with good intent, tried to frame the situation as Israel versus Hamas. And I was like, oh, okay, they can try and frame it like that, as opposed to being, oh, this is Israel against the Palestinians, right? They were trying to suss out this group and say, hey, this is just Hamas that is doing this. This isn't Palestinians at large. And that seemed like I saw that narrative a little bit, and boy, did it kind of fade very quickly. Like, it faded very quickly. I don't know. Did you notice that?
I did. And, and I can deplore that and be sad about it. But again, it's human nature. When you see a bunch of Palestinian civilians in Gaza who are gathered around as you're parading these bodies and they're cheering like a great victory, and it's some woman's body. You know, maybe it's you look at the video and maybe there's 100 people there and there's 2 million people in Gaza. So, you know, what conclusion can you draw from that? Maybe the only 100 people in the whole neighborhood who were really excited about that came out. But it doesn't matter. I mean, from our standpoint, I know how I get. You know, when I see, even in 2004, and these were soldiers, these are the Blackwater guys, you know, but when I see Americans being paraded around, you sort of just, you know, you start to go blind a little bit. And the Israelis, you know, one of the things that I think a lot of people don't, and I'm about to put out a podcast about this actually this week, that people don't quite understand that, like, they think that what happened here is like an escalation, and it is in terms of scale. But people
on whose side?
From Hamas, like that this has somehow brought things up to another level, and that is true from the standpoint of like the scale of the attack. But there's a lot of people, I think, who see, you know, them beheading people and doing all these horrible things to civilians, women, and they think that the brutality, the level of brutality has been stepped up, and that is not true. Israel has been dealing with this for decades. I mean, I put a couple anecdotes in here. I'll go ahead and read one. This is from 1978. This is a famous attack in fact, I'll do this one instead. So another one in 1978. There were dozens of these attacks over the years. I mean, hundreds, honestly, of these kinds of attacks that I'm about to read. This is a passage from Rise and Kill First by Ronan Bergman. On April 12, 1979, at close to midnight, a terror squad from the PLO-affiliated group headed by Abu Abbas landed in a rubber dinghy on the beach at Nahariya, an Israeli city 7 miles south of the Lebanese border. One of its 4 members was Samir Kuntar, then 16 and a half years old. After trying to break into a house and being frightened away by gunfire, and after killing a policeman who tried to arrest them, the 4 broke into the apartment of the Haran family and took the father, Danny, and his daughter, Einat, 4, as hostages. They dragged them to the beach, where soldiers and police had already deployed, and a firefight ensued. Kuntar shot Danny and then grabbed Einat by the hair and dashed her head with all his might against a rock again and again until she was dead. Danny's wife, Smadar, hid in a crawl space in their apartment with their 2-year-old daughter, Yael. Smadar covered the toddler's mouth with her hand to keep her from crying out and allowing the attackers to find them. Quote, I knew that if Yael cried out, the terrorists would toss a grenade into the crawl space and we would be killed, she wrote in an article. So I kept my hand over her mouth, hoping she could breathe. As I lay there, I remembered my mother telling me how she had hidden from the Nazis during the Holocaust. This is just like what happened to my mother, I thought. In her panic, Smadar pressed too hard. She smothered her little girl. The head of IDF's Northern Command, Major General Avigdor Janosch Bengal, arrived at the scene shortly after the incident. He saw Einat's shattered head, Yael's lifeless body, and Smadar screaming with anguish after realizing she had lost everything dear to her. You cannot imagine the dimensions of the atrocity, Bengal said. At the funeral for Danny and his 2 children, Prime Minister Begin quoted a line from Israel's national poet, Chaim Nachman Bialik. Satan has not yet created vengeance sufficient for the blood of a little child. So, you know, there are people out there, people in Congress, who will say, okay, yeah, well, what about the dead Palestinian children? And in another context, I hear that. Like, if I'm somebody, you know, if I had a kid who was beheaded or blown to bits by an airstrike, those are going to be roughly equivalent in the way that I feel about those things, like if that's my child. But there's people who pretend not to know the difference between those two things. I just don't believe anybody doesn't understand the difference, you know? And the difference is this, is if there's an Air Force commander who has ordered airstrikes that have killed civilians, maybe that guy should get brought up on war crimes. Maybe all of these sort of broader moral, on a broader moral level, you can condemn him or whatever. But that guy could be your neighbor. and be fine. Like, you wouldn't mind having that guy as a neighbor. He was doing his job in a context that is sort of just generally acceptable, whether or not it's right. And he could be a good neighbor, a good family man, a good community member, and all those things. If the person next to you went into that village and beheaded a bunch of people and raped a bunch of women, or, you know, all the things that are going on, you don't want that person as a neighbor. You don't want that person in your city. You don't want that person to be alive. They shouldn't be alive. You know, there's no prison deep, you know, there's no deep enough hole to put that person in that we would ever feel really comfortable that person should stick around. So it is totally different. I mean, the level of savagery you engage in, especially when, like with ISIS, like with Hamas during this attack, when the savagery and the shock of it is the point. That's school shooter stuff, you know, and it's evil. I mean, it's really evil. And you can make all the historical arguments you want about Zionist colonization and, you know, the settlements in the West Bank and, you know, how all those things, and that's all fine. But at the end of the day, when a bunch of your young men go across the border and rape and kill a bunch of women and children, then you know, you're not going to find a big audience, and the audience you find, you're certainly not going to find me in it.
Why is it then, do you think that narrative gets so drowned out at such a massive scale? Because it seems real obvious that no one would be saying, yeah, but, to women getting kidnapped, raped, and murdered, children getting executed, raped, and executed, raped, and kidnapped, and executed. It doesn't seem like there would be any qualifiers for any of those. And yet, it's there. It's there loud. I mean, we saw protests around the world, from Australia to Michigan, of people out supporting what's happening. And how does that happen? I believe it has something to do with the fact that, you know, when you watch Star Wars, the good guy is the rebels, right? Yeah. We support the underdog, and the world, there's a reason that movie and that thing resonates around the world. It's David versus Goliath, even biblical. It's like, oh, the little guy versus the big guy. So is that the narrative that just carries this whole story through? Is that, oh, there's people that have been oppressed. I've been oppressed, and so I support the people that have been oppressed. There's no movement of oppressors, right? There's no one that says, hey, you know, join my club. I'm one of the oppressors. You know,
I should start one of those.
Yeah, but that's truth, right?
Yeah,
there is no club of people that says we're the oppressors. You can join my. Who have you oppressed? If you haven't oppressed anybody significantly enough, you can't join my club. There's nothing like that.
I mean, nobody but straight up criminal gangs really looks at themselves as oppressors. Hamas doesn't look at themselves that way. You know, the National Socialists in Germany. This is the crazy thing that, you know, I warn people about getting caught up in war fever. When you start catching yourself, you know, it's sad when civilians and kids get killed, period. And if you find yourself getting sort of inured to that, you know, you do need to take a step back. Because here's the thing, the Germans thought that they were doing what they had to do to protect Germany and the German people. They really believed in the righteousness of their own cause. They weren't just over there rubbing their hands like, like Dr. Claw. They thought that they were doing what had to be done. And everybody pretty much believes that, except for, again, like just straight up criminal gangs who are extorting and exploiting people that way. And it's because, you know, you can talk yourself in anything. You can find reasons. I mean, Hamas has, again, like from a historical standpoint, go listen to my whole series on the early Zionist movement and the creation of Israel. They have historical grievances that anybody who I think is fair-minded would say deserve a hearing, and so they can take that and convince themselves over time that killing children from the other side is actually acceptable or even laudable.
First of all, war fever. You talked about war fever.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a saying in the SEAL teams, everybody wants to be a frogman on a sunny day, meaning when you're down in Coronado and you're like a tourist on the beach and you see these young SEALs, studs that are out there on a run, and it's this Friday afternoon and it's nice and warm and looks like the best job in the world. Of course, everyone will say, oh, I want to be a SEAL. But they don't want to actually do SEAL shit, which is cold, wet, miserable, dangerous, and you kill and you die. Well, there's like a heavier version of that, and it's what that war fever is. Like everybody, around the world is cheering on their side, and these are just like the cries of big mouths, because when it comes time to put on some kit and go do work, well, that those mouths get a lot quieter. So there's that going on. There's that going on a lot. The other thing is, I just re-released a book called Leadership Strategy and Tactics. I had a new expanded edition, and one of the big things I talk about is decision making. And I go through this. One of the new things I added to the book was about decision making, and there's a process that I'd go through for decision making. And it's like, how much time do I have? I look at the 4 laws of combat leadership. It cover, move, simple, prioritize, and execute, decentralized command. Then I've got some checks in there that are, they take like an introspective thought process. Number one, is my ego making this decision? Because you can make some really bad decisions based on your ego. Are my emotions making this decision? Because you can make some really bad decisions based on your emotions. Do I understand the perspective of other people? The other people that I work with, do I understand their perspective? Because if I don't understand their perspective, if I don't understand my enemy's perspective, if I don't understand my counterparty, if I'm in a negotiation, if I don't understand their perspective, if I don't understand my subordinate's perspective, if I'm in a leadership position, if I don't understand my boss's perspective, if I'm in a leadership position but I'm working for someone else, if I don't understand what my peers are thinking, if I don't see a lot of perspective, I'm not making good decisions. And then there's this point about, is my decision in support of what we are doing tactically and strategically? Because if it doesn't, then I shouldn't be doing it. So when you look at like this decision-making process, we talked about Hamas. Like, what is Hamas's strategic goal? Did they increase their chance? Like, if you're a normal Palestinian person, you're like, well, you know what I'd really like? I really wish we could have a two-party state. I wish we could have a little chunk of land, and I wish everything was cool and we could kind of like live ourselves, have our own little part of the world, and I'd be really stoked. Okay, cool. In what way, shape, or form did Hamas just forward that concept in any way?
Yeah, Hamas are absolutist in their aims. They're not looking to compromise. Arafat said one time, and this is an exact quote, but it's pretty close, that Israel will be defeated by the womb of the Palestinian mother. And that you can kill us, you can mow the lawn all you want, but we're going to have 2 babies for every 1 person you kill, and we're going to catch up to you one of these days. And from the perspective of a group like Hamas, they're not trying to conquer Israel with an attack like this. I think what they're trying to do, to a degree, is, they have their own domestic and even international goals, probably derailing the peace process with the Arab states between Israel and Saudi Arabia and so forth, as well as just showing their own people that we have the power to strike and cause damage, and the Zionist machine fears us or whatever. They have those type of things. But as far as what they're actually trying to accomplish with regard to Israel, is they're not trying to conquer the place. They're just trying to make New York City or London a more attractive place for Jews to live than Tel Aviv. That's the goal. Because you might be an Israeli Jew who's, a patriot and all of those things, but
You love your daughter.
You love your daughter, and you have cousins in New York, a whole bunch of people. He's got a job waiting for you and everything. And people do this. Israel has seen over recent years, you've seen an influx of people coming in from Europe because of the Islamist anti-Semitism that's cropped up there. But before that, there was an outflow of people. People were leaving Israel, moving to the United States and other places. I know Israelis who've done that. And, like we said, Israel's a small country. It's got a small Jewish population, and I think it's 25 or 30% of the population already is Arab, and a lot of those are moderate Arabs who are certainly no fans of Hamas or anything like that. But pretty much all of them, a vast majority of them, put it that way, are in support of the Palestinian cause in general terms. And so if it's 30% now, and the Arabs are having more babies than the Jews, and you can create enough chaos, just make the place unlivable. Create enough chaos that people who value the life of their daughter more than they do their commitment to the Zionist cause say, you know what, I'm going to take that job my cousin has for me in New York. My family's leaving. Enough is enough. Leave this problem to other people who don't have kids or something like that. That if that starts to happen, and now it's 33% Arab compared to 67% Jewish, and then now it's 38%, and you start to get Israelis looking around and looking down the road and seeing charts that say in 2052 it's going to be 51% Arab, or it's going to things are going in that direction, then that outflow could accelerate because people don't want to be the last one fighting to get out the door. And I think that's part of the goal. Just create enough chaos, make this play, and that's it partially answers why the savagery. Part of it I do think is to provoke a massive response that they can use for propaganda purposes and to delegitimize the Arab regimes that try to make peace with Israel. But part of it, I think, is they're trying to shock and terrify people into leaving. And that sounds implausible, like nobody would ever do that. But it, like I said, to a degree, it was happening in small numbers. And it's not implausible, especially when you look at the demographic direction of that region in general, but that country specifically anyway. And, Hamas is, again, these people aren't thinking in terms of individual lifespans. These are people who are perfectly willing to die, even eager to die. People have to remember sometimes that these people in Hamas, these young men who go join Hamas, and just the people in Gaza in general, like they grow up from the earliest age just in a stew of hate propaganda that would make, the most anti-Semitic person in the United States skin crawl. That is what they hear every day. It's what they hear from adults, authority figures. The most prestigious people in Hamas, in Gaza, the most prestigious people are martyrs, which often means people who went and killed a bunch of civilians before they got shot by Israeli police. And there have been, a lot of examples where they've polled school children in Gaza and asking them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And something like 65, 70, depending on the poll percent, say, I want to be a martyr. Because everybody wants to be high status in the context of your society. And that's what high status is there, and how you deal with something like that is, that's a next level problem. It really is. It's not a typical counterinsurgency problem.
No, it's beyond. It's beyond. I don't know what the solution is. When you think about it in these terms, though, and you're Israel, you have got to take dramatic actions.
There's no choice.
Like you've got to take dramatic actions, and you've got to kind of shrug your shoulders and say, we're doing this.
Because otherwise Hamas will get exactly what I was just talking about. If the state does not, if something like this happens and the state cannot demonstrate the will to act decisively, then you are going to start getting Israelis who care about the safety of their daughters saying, you know what, I don't know about this. So they have to. They have no choice.
Yeah. And as that escalates, this is the another real concern here is as Israel executes on this, which again, do they have a choice? from an emotional level, we're not supposed to make decisions emotionally, but when someone that someone within your circle of people that you know, people that you care about, was raped, tortured, kidnapped, and executed, from an emotion, all of a sudden, those decisions start becoming very emotional. Then you start looking at it from a logical perspective of, okay, if we don't do anything, we no longer can protect our citizenry, and our citizenry begins to leave, and we will not have this state anymore. So they are going to have to respond in a very heavy way. When they do that, look, it was within one day there was people around the world in support of Palestine or the Palestinians. How does this is what worries me about this, is we start to get, it's like when they detonated the first atom bomb, they thought there was a couple theories that when that one hydrogen split and hit the next one, that one would hit the next one, and that one would hit the next one. It would destroy the entire world. This is, to me, a similar situation where Israel is about to unleash, well, as they said, hell. Said, you guys wanted hell, you're going to get it. They're about to unleash hell. What is going to happen around the world with terrorist attacks? There's Palestinian people around the world that are strongly in support of Hamas. What is going to happen when they start to act out? Does this thing escalate? What is Hezbollah going to do? Are they going to open up a second front to the north? Where do you think this escalates to?
It's hard to say. There are a lot of factors involved, but I'll tell you the thing I worry about is I think that the war in Ukraine has had the effect of telling these regimes like Iran, some of these regimes, I'll call them rogue regimes in the sense of being rogue from the U.S.-led international system, the one that we are typically at odds with. It's kind of shown them, or at least given them the idea, and this might be wrong, but that's what you were talking about at the very beginning, about how wars happen when people miscalculate the will or strength the other side, that technological changes, whether it's drones and all these different things, that these superpowers aren't quite so super anymore. That maybe we might be a little bit ragtag compared to them, but if you exploit different advantages, Iran might be thinking go ahead and try and invade us. The base in Kuwait is within range of all our missiles. The embassy in Baghdad's within range of all our missiles. We've got, maybe that would. There's already a Shiite government that is semi-aligned with Iran in Iraq. Maybe that would lead to an extremist Shiite government that's fully aligned with Iran taking over in Iraq. And they might just be getting bold like that. And if that's the case, especially since these, the Syrians, Hezbollah, the Iranians, you've got to remember, they've been in combat recently. They were in hard combat against ISIS and al-Nusra and the other jihadists in Syria for several years. I think I read somewhere Hezbollah took 5,000 to 8,000 dead, which is a massive amount. That's conventional force level of casualties that they're taking, and so they've got experience. They're not going to have a fear of warfare and combat. They may have overconfidence in their air defense capabilities. Hezbollah specifically, but Iran and Syria as well, and it may lead to some miscalculations. And they may just look at, what happened in Afghanistan. They may look at our president who, can hardly mumble out a complete sentence without being carted off by his handlers. And they may just look at this and say, this is a good opportunity for us to accomplish some things we've been talking about for a long time, because, nobody is minding the store right now. And that might not be true. It might be that they try to do something like that, and next year we say, oh, okay, this is serious now, and things change, and we elect somebody that's different, and things do shape up really quick, and that's a terrible move for them. But, these might be the calculations that they're making. And so How it escalates, I mean, I really hope Hezbollah does not get involved. If Hezbollah opens a second front, and it really is not just harassment, but opens a front in the north, then Israel's going to go into full existential mode. And it's going to be fighting as if its existence depends on it, because it does. You know, Hezbollah, last I saw, is they thought to have 60 to 80,000 fighters, dedicated fighters. Like, that's not the IDF, but that's serious, you know. And if that happens, then Israel's probably going to attack Syria. They're going to attack Lebanon. Iran might get involved. It could spiral very, very quickly. And I think Hezbollah is incentivized to not do that. But I don't know. This might be, you know, there might be a larger.
What's the incentivization for them to not
get
in the game?
That Hezbollah has worked really hard over the years to play for to try to take the road of them, you know, them being representative of Lebanon as a country. And so they actually have some support from the Druze and Shiite and even the Christian community there. Not like all these people are, you know, push Israel into the sea people, but they see Hezbollah as like defenders of Lebanon, and they don't hate them, at least. And they even have like some positive support. But if they go pick a fight with Israel because the Gazans, you know, the Hamas decided to go massacre a bunch of women and children and partygoers, and so Hezbollah decides they're going to go get involved, and now all these Christians and Druze and Sunni and Shiite civilians are getting their homes bombed or their neighborhoods destroyed or by Israel, that very possibly and probably would come back on Hezbollah. Now the question is, and you kind of been talking about this the whole time, is, you know, let's revisit that in a couple weeks after Israel is bouncing rubble in Gaza for a while, and reports are coming out about how people don't have water, and, you know, children who are wounded can't be treated in hospitals because they don't have supplies for them, and this starts to happen. Then maybe in some of these Arab countries, maybe in Lebanon, you start to see people starting to bay for some Israeli blood, and maybe Hezbollah would have the cover to do something like that. I mean, at a certain point, a group like Hezbollah, it has to answer the question to its own people. What do you exist for, if not this? Like, what is it that we need you and not just the Lebanese army or whatever for, if not to eventually do something? And I think that's part of what motivates a group like Hamas to do something like this. It's like, what do you exist for, if not to, you know, at the very least, fight back against the occupier or whatever? And they have to demonstrate some willingness and capability to do that. And Hezbollah, you know, granted, they have been in combat recently, and I think everybody in Lebanon knows that they did, you know, good service for the people of Lebanon, put it that way, because they were fighting legitimate jihadists out there. But it would, like I said, if they do open a second front up in the north, man, Israel, the way people that I would talk to when I would go over there would talk about Hezbollah, I wouldn't say they're champing at the bit to get that one back, but they all had the mentality that the next time we get into a real fight with Hezbollah, that it is on like Donkey Kong, and it's a fight to the finish. And so hopefully it doesn't go to that. Hopefully, you know, it stays confined like it did in 2014. The assault in 2014 was bad. I mean, they destroyed, again, whole swaths of the city in Gaza. It was really bad. And Hezbollah didn't get involved, and Iran didn't get involved. And so hopefully that's where it stays. But if Israel is really dedicated to going in and trying to root out and eradicate Hamas, then that opens up a large amount of time for the environment to change.
How much influence does America have over what they're going to do and not do?
I think a lot, you know. Well, the question is, how much influence do we have right now? You know, by the end of the Obama administration, there was reports from people who were in the administration who would say that they couldn't get the Saudis or the Israelis to pick up the phone. Literally, they could not get them to pick up the phone. They had just alienated them so much. And when you look at, you know, Israel whether you think they're overplaying the Iranian threat or whatever it is, they don't think they're overplaying it. They are very concerned about the Iranian nuclear program and all these things. It's not just a thing they're doing to gin up right-wing votes for Netanyahu or something. They believe that this is a very serious threat. Biden just gave them $6 or $7 billion. He's constantly just tried to shift away from, there are these two factions in Washington, D.C., and I'm talking to a few people about this because I don't fully understand it, and I've seen only the outlines of it. When you look at who funds which think tanks and, various things, but that there's a faction in D.C., and the Obama administration was squarely in this camp, where they were very pro-Qatar and pro-Iran. And they really didn't truly, you've got the Ben Rhodes, the sort of foreign policy guru of the Obama administration, who's going on Twitter. This isn't recently, but this is in recent years, going on Twitter and just calling Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, calling him a murderous thug and all these. This is an ally, whether or not, calling Netanyahu a racist and a fascist and stuff. This is, whether or not you think that, you're a U.S. foreign policy advisor to the president, and these are our allies, and that's extreme language to be putting out into the public sphere like that. But he was doing it, and a lot of those people have done it, and they really don't like Saudi Arabia. They don't like Israel. They don't like the sort of the security network that we have spent decades kind of constructing over there with Egypt and Israel and Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Oman and Jordan, and Turkey obviously has been a little bit of a loose cannon over the last decade and a half, but they just don't like that. They think that this whole thing where we take one side of this Sunni Shiite fight and we say if these people don't like Iran, then we don't like Iran either. We're just going to back our guys. That the Obama administration wanted to abandon that. He wanted to try to make friends with Iran. And, he was doing it over the screaming protests of the Israelis and the Saudis, who, that he wouldn't even allow them to be involved in the negotiations. And it really alienated them. And so who knows what it's going to be like with the Biden administration. Trump, this was one of the main themes of the Trump presidency, is he was very much 100% on board with that traditional security architecture. Mm-hmm. The Israelis, the Saudis, UAE, build them up, support them, and if Iran wants to be their enemy, then Iran is our enemy. And the theory behind that was, if we do that, then we can pull back. Maybe not leave, but we can pull back, because now
there's a balance of power.
Yeah, if Saudi and UAE and Jordan and Israel and Egypt are all on friendly terms, they can handle their business in the Middle East, and we can kind of pull back a little bit. And there are other factions. There's the Qatar Iranian faction that the Brookings Institute gets a ton of funding from Qatar. A lot of the think tanks do. And you look at the people who go into government and then get out and go get a sinecure at one of these think tanks, and then you look at the policies they supported and support when they go into government, and it all tracks, And so there's a lot of that stuff going on that is sort of the deep politics of all this. It's hard to decipher, though.
As this unfolds, as Israel rolls into Gaza, which hasn't started yet, but we are both assuming that they're going to roll in there and cause mass destruction. And now you're going to get, UAE's been obviously, they were in league, basically, with Israel. That was under Trump, kind of signed that agreement. Jordan, always been kind of there. What's going to happen with the populace inside? I saw, again, a video of protesters in Jordan, full-on Palestinian flags everywhere. There's going to be some destabilization as Israel starts to attack and destroy Gaza. There's going to be some massive destabilization in the Islamic world, I think, to a degree we've actually never seen before.
That's why the longer this goes on, like Israel is on a timeline here. Because the thing is, like, they might not care what people think. They have to go do what they have to do. Maybe they don't care what some left-wing group in France thinks or something as they protest, you can kiss my ass. But what they do care about is, like, they really do want to make peace with Saudi Arabia and Jordan, all these countries. I mean, it would be just, they really want that, put it that way. Like, the people over there really want that. It matters to them. And they understand that Israelis are very practical in their politics. Like, they have to be. They've always had to be very practical in their politics. And they understand the position that some of these regimes are in, that they are sitting on top of volcanoes, populations. Like, Saudi Arabia is a perfect example. And people think of the Saudi royal family as this just extremist Wahhabist. And there are members of the royal family who are certainly like that. But I talked to a Saudi one time. He didn't live in Saudi Arabia anymore. He'd come to the U.S., but he was pretty just liberal. He's a Muslim, but he was pretty liberal, just a normal guy. And he was full on in support of the royal family. And I was like, that's interesting. What about, women driving and da-da-da? And he was like, you don't understand. If we instituted democracy in Saudi Arabia, the next day we would elect a government that was way more extreme than the royal family. The royal family is a moderating force. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Certainly the case in Jordan, certainly the case in Egypt, where in Jordan and Egypt, just, there are cosmopolitan people who are not extremists or anything, but there's large, look what happened in Egypt during the Arab Spring. The Muslim Brotherhood might not be the majority of the population, but they were able to elect the president, and Hamas is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's what Hamas is. And so, Israel's looking at that, and they're not going to completely ignore the predicament that these Arab regimes are in, because they do want to normalize relations with them. On the other hand, they are in a position, it's like you said, they have no choice but to retaliate massively and to try to do something that looks like a sufficient response for what just happened. And it's going to take a lot,
All right. Well, the interesting, or the what I think is a dynamic that's very different here as well is this is going to be like a day-to-day changing. This is going to be a dynamic. This is a more dynamic situation than normal conflict.
Yeah. Because
of all the explosiveness in the region, of all the things that can go wrong, of all the parties that are in play, of all the just the proximity of everything, right? The proximity, like, we go to war with Afghanistan. It takes a long time to get all that set up. Or Iraq, it takes a long time for those things. Take time. This is now, and every change on the battlefield is going to impact strategically what's going on with all the partners that are in play. We're going to have to pay attention to this and pay attention close.
We should revisit this in a few weeks as things develop, because it will be interesting to see if it does follow that familiar pattern from 2006 and 2014, where that initial surge of sympathy for the Israeli side after a few weeks of images coming out of Gaza of, babies crying and rubble on the streets, that, if the previous pattern holds, that's going to start to change. And the media narrative and everything is going to be very different. And so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
And it's going to be interesting to see how all these different players act and react. We'll try and get to you all a little sooner. But if you want to check us out, check out Darryl's podcast called Martyr Made. This is he's got the best podcast about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What is it, the first 6, right? It's the first 6 of that series. It's as in-depth as you could ever want it. He gets as much hate mail from Palestinians as he does from Israelis. He gets as much love mail from Israelis as he does Palestinians. The thing about Darryl you got to remember is his arguments they have a long arc to them. So as he tries to explain things, he deviates and leaves, and it takes him a long time to get to his point because he wants to be well-rounded, unless you follow him on Twitter, in which case he's a troll. And you just got to understand that.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. But do check out Martyr Made. He's got a bunch of other series on there as well, but there's no better time to listen to the Martyr Made podcast, the first 6 series about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I obviously have a couple other podcasts, Jocko podcasts, JockoUnderground.com. You can support that. We sell stuff at JockoStore.com. We have OriginUSA.com, JockoFuel.com. Also, Darryl has his Substack. It's martyrmade.substack.com. And finally, I have a leadership consulting company because all problems, including this problem, is a leadership problem. And that's at echelonfront.com. That's it for now, everybody. And thanks for listening as things certainly unravel. This is Darryl and Jocko out.